Laura Jan Shore will be our next speaker, and her book is Afterglow. Laura is a returned IP author. She published a book with us called Water Over Stone some years ago, and she's come back again to publish the book Afterglow. Laura has lived on the far north coast of New South Wales ever since immigrating to Australia in 1996. Her previous poetry collections include Water Over Stone, which was the IP Picks Best Poetry winner of 2011, when we still had a best competition. Her work has been published in anthologies and literary journals on 4 continents. President of Dangerous Poetic Press down in the Byron area. She's been teaching creative writing since 1980.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. So my collection is called Afterglow, and it arose after the sudden death of my husband, and I felt a real need to capture every little memory I had, every little quirk and uniqueness of who he was, because once he was gone, it was such a strange silence. So I began writing, and since I was a poet, of course, they became poems. And I'll open with a poem I wrote on the first anniversary of his death. It's now 5 years after he died, and it took me about 4 years to write this collection. First anniversary. Outside my window, the hue, hue, hue of mourning doves, and I wake bewildered. The redwoods hold each other up below the soil, intertwined. On your side of the bed, I've spread a felled tree's worth of poetry, the mulch of memory. Your stopped breath still saturates my lungs. In the night, the moans that startle me are my own. Each room where you are not, your things imprinted with your touch, I gather into piles to give away or toss. I carry that spark, my heart would. Where do our high voltage fingers find each other in the dark? So I wanted to capture his quirky, unique nature, and one of his favorite words was foibles. So this poem is in praise of foibles. He wore his imperfections lightly, announced them to strangers in the park. He was his own blooper reel, a bank of dispensations when the rest of us screwed up. He slept in his clothes for days and then jumped in the pool to wash them. When someone cut him off in traffic, he wouldn't snarl or curse, but thinking of something he'd done worse, and forgive them both. When he bid on a construction job, his price was low, with a proviso. His gusto could, and probably would, suddenly flag. No guarantees when the work would be done, but his company was fun. He could trash a hotel room in seconds flat. Socks strewn over lampshades, sheets pulled loose, pillows tossed. His own lair was a fug of detritus. And when he first moved in, lugging boxes of unpaid taxes and bills, I prayed for strength. He was the H in humble, though he had hubris too. When the switch flipped and his slick self rose from the ashes of defeat. Revitalized, he became a whirl of industry. And when I asked for a divorce, he said he understood. He'd divorce himself if he could. 5 years we traveled separate shores, untangling what was his and what was hers, until we were clear our divorce had been failure. Although love meant more paperwork, we volunteered for another round. So yes, I married him twice. This is no refuge. I wish I had been there when you were a cross-eyed child, forever losing your glasses into Pew Park, your father marching you back to the apple sapling, thick lenses dangling from a branch. You balked at desks and books. Your paradise was damming up streams and riding small pines in the wind. All the falls and breaks, the woods where the hemlocks split, thrusting you to the rocks, and the driveway where you knelt examining a nest of ants, the scar on your ankle where the truck drove over it. What lay beneath? Trounced by bullies, your quirky gifts and shifts of mood misunderstood. Blame can breed fury, but in you it was bewilderment. Where's the kindness here? You switched off the TV news with its shock and awe wars and planted Christmas trees for solace. Your Jane phase, when you refused to wear shoes or anything made of leather. You flinched as each footfall crushed soil microbes. A bee vibrating a pink bloom reminded you how many flowers never fruited anymore, how even the spring sun scalds. Born to defile the garden, this creed of dominion bred into us. How to recast this ancient tale. When a tree falls in the forest, it's swarmed. Lichens, fungi, rodents, and insects devour it, bark to pith. Nothing's left but mulch. The word paradise is Old Persian, meaning walled garden. Rumpled and weary, you groped for the gate. On the gnarled tree and lone apple, cankered and brown, clings past its season. I feel your hand on my shoulder and stare up, searching the clouds. So we met when we were about, I was just 30, and we'd both been married before and both had 2 kids. So this is first night. She was on her knees, straddling him, her loose hair cresting over his chest. It felt like he'd always crooned, slightly off key, in her ear, as he nuzzled the nape of her neck, examined the creases in her palm, rapt, as if she were the pony he'd begged for each Christmas as a boy. He ran his calloused thumb across her lips, and she suckled it, his knuckle salty and a little sweet. His plush thighs pillowed hers. She draped the sheets over their heads, his musk like forest loam, his hands at home steering her hips. Together, the shattering She was unabashed by the animal sounds she'd made, and when he said, "I love you," his voice rumbling as if up from an underground cave, that phrase her mother dared not utter, all she needed to hear as a child. She felt it resound and swell, saturating her every thirsting cell. Anand loved to go walk about, and he kept his sleeping bag behind the couch, ready to go, and his van packed. And so I never knew when he was going to take off between jobs and where he was going to go, because we didn't have mobile phones in those days. And then suddenly he was back, and we'd both be so excited with so much to say to each other that it was kind of like a crash landing. And so we learned to sit in silence together to kind of recalibrate our energies before we spoke. So this poem is called Don't Say It. Don't say it. Not in your mother tongue, diction quick and soft and hushed. Not Kalahari style, with plosive clicks, or in a guttural throat purr. Even the sibilant whisper, the soft palate hum, would startle that wagtail's plucky strut and the pair of wonga pigeons rustling in the brush. It would interrupt the canticle of crows, the dithering of pines. Your words would make the searing sky grow pale, the distant hills darken. Sit here with me and breathe the inarticulate blessings as damp rises and sun sets. The heat of your palm on my knee is enough. So Anand was very transparent. And one of the very first things he told me was that he had been diagnosed bipolar and had been hospitalized. It took me a while to really understand the reality of that very complex mood swings. This is called Winter Doldrums. One night, the poles shifted. After months of perfect coupling, the orbit wobbled. His eyes, those hazel craters of invitation, froze over. Balm of his voice tightened. The rat-a-tat shotgun retort. If only she could seduce him out of this madness, ease his frayed nerves. Slowly, she stripped off her bra, shimmied her breasts, but he didn't watch. She slipped into bed, but he failed to wrap his thighs around her choked feet. She nuzzled with her cheek, her favorite perch on his heart, but he grunted and flipped over. She dared not breach the wings of his back, swallowed her words, turned out the light. Skating black ice, her thoughts skidded out from under her. She heard the surface crack. So there were the ups, the wild spending sprees. This is called a bargain. A deal at half the price. You email a photo as proof. This once in a lifetime, only you can spot it, treasure beneath the asbestos cladding, sagging porch, aluminum windows, stuffed on concrete blocks, slightly out of plumb, beach shack. You stand in the foreground, unveiling your magic trick. Ta-da! Arms extended, fingers thrust out like antennae. Your entire face luminous with a toothy grin. The pitch of your voice rises, your tempo speeds, a froth of possibilities I clearly don't get. You are Jack, come home without the cow. These magic beans, our fortune now. What goes up must go down. This is called waking slow. Gradually, he relinquished the texture of bark, scent of pine needles and snow, the loam of freshly turned soil. The fiddler's waltz felt funereal to him then. The variegated grain of a slab of rosewood failed to rouse him to turn on his lathe. He traveled to Yosemite and never got out of the car. And when he returned, the children clamoring in and out of his lap were all too much for him. Eyes glazed, dreams vanished. He retired to the blue light of a screen to blot out his imaginings. Old sitcoms he used to watch as a boy. The familiar surf of laugh tracks, rising and falling. Ticking off the hours he woke, only to wait until his bones were weary enough to sink, as he'd say, into something cozy, like a coma. That void-defying void. Then it was all good again. It was up and it was down. This is called Prelude to an Afternoon Nap. Your freckled Irish skin with its multiple flavors, bitter apricots. Your lopsided grin, ever amazed at the bounty of my breasts. The frisson of awe. Our limbs roll into and over each other as if caught in a mountain stream gathering force. Your beard a tickle I barely notice, a tangle of hands and breath. In the lush forest of your gaze, like when we met, I catch a rare glimpse of something wild that startles and flies off. Your eyes, I've studied these 30 years and will never comprehend. The thrill of your strangeness. I'm immersed in the thrust of our differences. My pelvic squeeze, voltage amplified with age. Who could have imagined ripening together like this? And then my penultimate poem, again. Yesterday, before dawn, I was crucified again. The iron spikes were thoughts, biting soft flesh. A toothache of fear, the panic bell clang, the Judas kiss of self-betrayal. When the death bird swooped in to peck loose the string bag of my beliefs, everything tight and knotted fell away. In the space between, I discovered my untouched self. And finally, we had an agreement that no matter what was going on, if one of us said, let's meditate, we'd drop everything and we'd meditate together. So So this is called our covenant. Tangled, as we sometimes were, in discord, padlocked, shackled, and chained, if one of us was sane enough to call it, we'd both drop everything, stop, and breathe together. Dive into the warm sea of the heart. Sink below the noose of thought. With a Houdini's grace, a dimensional shift. Unloosed, we'd float in whispered wisdom of the unseen. As with the phantom limb, my body still throbs for yours. My mind stumbles over your old boots, no longer in the hall. Seated now beside your empty chair, I hear your call. I'll meet you there.